So we're in the second half of this after an interruption of the internet. We can go back to what we were talking about in the sense of always looking at it in the here now and developing the skill. So starting to be on guard, which means starting to watch what kind of thoughts we have, whether we're on the cushion or not. This is really the waking up of the sati, is to start investigating. Is the topic of my internal conversation right now wholesome or unwholesome? And if it's unwholesome, then we throw it out and we come back to this present moment, or this pleasant moment is a way of saying it.
Okay.
That's that developing that skill, is to watch the mind on a regular basis. And if it is in the unwholesome, we throw that out and get back into the wholesome. And it's good to practice that often throughout the day. A clear example would be that if someone is meditating, sitting on a cushion, doing whatever practice they're doing, and practicing an hour a day, and then going about living their life normally, that means that at best, they're removing hindrances 1 hour a day and letting hindrances run wild for 23.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why people have slow practice. That really faster practice is when we get the attitude, oh, I can feel good anytime I can remember to. But this has nothing to do with squatting on the floor, and it has everything to do with paying attention to what the mind is doing.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been, I don't know, for some reason I've just been trying to keep it to cushion, or keeping it to whenever I sit down and try to meditate. I know when we first started talking, it was like, I was super excited and jazzed, and was just trying to do it all throughout the day, like every day, just like trying to be like, oh, I noticed it, I'm gonna take a deep breath. And then for some reason, it's like, no, I need to like make sure I'm doing it right. So I'm gonna keep it confined to the cushion. So yeah,
And so basically, if we're looking at it from skill development, we need to get secluded from the world because it's hard for people to recognize how influenced we are by the outside world.
yeah,
But this is one of the reasons why the Buddha would have his guys to get away from the world, to go into seclusion, to find a place of solitude. This is the right way of beginning practice, is first we get secluded from the world, and then we get secluded from the world that we carried around with us.
okay.
But
So
it's
won't do any good to try to stay in the world and do this like
we
that.
have to get away from it, but you can, okay, let us say right here where you're sitting, you can look around the room that you're in and you can see that room as the world. And now you can sit right where you are and close your eyes, and you are secluded from that world.
Oh, okay. I
All
see what you
right?
mean. Yeah.
Yeah. We have to get away from the outside world. The Buddha used a simile about a log in a swamp. But where I come from, we had swamps and we called it a bog. And so the story now is the log in the bog. And the question is, in the time of the Buddha, they had professional fire makers. Now we have lighters of all descriptions. Gas and butane and electric and easy to do, easy peasy. Back in the time of the Buddha, starting a fire was a big deal. And so they had professionals to do it. So can a professional fire maker go into that bog and set that log on fire? Now that
Into
log
a
has been
bog?
in the bog. It's been in the bog. It's been the tree fell over like in the swamps. You know, the cypress trees, they fall over when they get
Have to get it out of the bog
saturated.
first, probably.
You got to get it out of the bog first. That's
Be all
exactly
swampy.
right.
Yeah.
You cannot set that log on fire while it's in the water,
Hmm.
in the bog. But even if we drag it out on the shore, you still can't start it because it's still saturated with water. But if you leave the log out of the bog for a while, leaving it in the sunlight, both the sunlight and the gravity will begin to pull the water out of the top part of the log
Hmm.
so that you can then set that log on fire. If that's the case, then that's the kind of way that we need to look at one's own practice, is that we need to get away from it all on a regular basis to help start drying out. But the drying out process is literally now to get the bog out of the log. Once the log is out of the bog, so that
Okay.
means
Yeah.
is that once you get the mind out of the world, you now got to get the world out of the mind.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, I couldn't just expect to like stare at my email inbox with like meetings pouring in and expect the practice to work. I would have to, close my eyes, don't look at my
Right.
emails,
Uh-huh.
like,
Exactly.
or
Right.
like
So
whatever the world is at that point.
that's a really good example nowadays.
Yeah.
The inbox. Right. Um, some people even call it incoming.
Incoming?
Right. As a reference to the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Yeah. Incoming means our artillery is coming. And
Hmm.
we often look at emails like they were artillery about to blow up in our face, in the sense of, oh no, I don't want to see that. Uh, but what we're getting at here is to keep um, going off alone and starting to practice so that we can get sati going. But then we want to keep that sati going.
Hmm.
We want to develop it as a habit. And it all has to do around what kind of thoughts do we have? Do we have the kind of thoughts that are hindering us? Or do we have the kind of thoughts that are facilitating us? Are we having unwholesome or wholesome thoughts?
Hmm.
Okay. We're not anywhere near the area of saying we want to remove thoughts. Because if we can't uh, let us say herd them into good thoughts, how can we destroy them completely?
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that's
We're not
that's that's way too much. That's
not
way
trying to
too far
destroy
ahead.
thoughts. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We're
We
just
can,
trying to like have wholesome thoughts,
hmm
herd
and so
the
we can.
thoughts into the correct direction, not necessarily like, yeah.
Okay, so now we practice sitting on, let us say, uh, in whatever posture, in whatever location or place. We want to do it in seclusion to be able to get away from everything. Now, that seclusion can be found almost anywhere in a physical location, but it's also good to get out of town, to get out of the noisy areas, to get into a quiet place. That's good. That's part of getting away from it all, because only when it's quiet on the outside can you really hear how noisy it is on the inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's one of the qualities of it is that we can get ourselves into seclusion so that we can begin to deal with all of that stuff that will come up one at a time, and we can deal with it one at a time as it comes up if we have sati. And so we want to make sure that we can wake up enough to get bright enough so that we can see these thoughts as unwholesome.
Where does you mentioned the bodily awareness?
Hmm
being in reference to the first jhana. Where does that fit into this?
Relax. That's where it
So on
fits
the
in.
exhale,
Let the body
relaxing.
relax.
Okay. The
Okay.
relaxing helps you be more aware of the body.
Well, being aware of the body helps it relax
Oh,
also.
that's true, because then you can see the tension and you can let the
Uh-huh.
tension go. You can't, it's hard to
And,
let.
and when we can allow the mind to relax out of an unpleasant state into a happy, pleasant state, then that will help the body relax. That because of the formal definitions that abound for first jhana, that have 5 factors in it. The factors being first, free from hindrances, which means we have wholesome thoughts. That's the number one item. If we are having wholesome thoughts, then that wholesome thought can allow us to have pleasure. There is a sutta that actually goes in the direction of this. The sutta talks about that there are 5 ways to reach the first jhana. And the 5th way, the last on the list, is the way that most of us are practicing meditation. Because if we're all in seclusion from the world on our own, then naturally what will be coming up is what we're in the habit of having come up, and that's often hindrances. Okay? There is another way of practice completely. And that way of practice is basically what you and I are doing right now. And that is talking about the Dhamma. That if a teacher and a student are talking about the Dhamma, and the student gains inspiration from that Dhamma, I can do this as that inspiration. Then in that moment, while that student is feeling inspiration, he can feel relaxed, he can feel comfortable, he can feel sukha, and he can go right into the first jhana, right in that conversation. But oh no, it can happen the other way around. And that is that while the Dhamma is being taught, the teacher can gain inspiration from the Dhamma. He also can fall, or not fall, but allow his mind to go into a state of comfortableness. His body is relaxed. He's enthusiastic about it. And he can go into the first jhana. The first jhana is a very, very natural state for people to fall into or go into. I'm not sure of the word fall, but it can seem like that. And when people look at Buddhism and the teachings of Buddhism as if it had anything to do with magic or religion, then we'll put this first jhana as way high, way far away. But in fact, it's actually something that can be developed, and we can keep doing it and practicing going into that state of being sabai, being comfortable, being happy, being contented. And so by practicing over and over again, we begin then to gain that skill of going into the jhana, which means that we can throw that stuff out. Oh, I don't have to think about Aunt Susie dying. I don't have to think about the argument that I had with Aunt Jane. I can just sit here in this moment, in the here now, and be comfortable. So throwing those thoughts about Aunt Jane and Granny or whatever out of the mind is getting into the first jhana. All we now need to do is to learn to sustain that, which means now we're going to go into a different kind of alert mode, and we normally in Buddhism call this guarding, to begin to guard the mind. But now we got something very special going on in the sense that we're going to guard the mind with the object of sustaining the way that we feel. So any kind of thoughts that we have, happy thoughts, joyful thoughts, thoughts of I can do this, thoughts about how wonderful and nice this present moment is, thoughts about, in fact, in the realm of the Four Noble Truths. This is suffering. Or, this is the end of suffering. Oh, right now I'm free from it. Right now I am sabai. Right now I am not worried or hassled or bothered or being discomforted by anything. Everything right now is good. Okay. These are the kind of thoughts that are wholesome. Another kind of thought that would be wholesome would be the investigation, in the sense of, how's my sati? How's my investigation going? How's my joy? How are my jhana factors operating right now? What's my effort like? Do I have the right attitude? You darn right, I've got a good attitude. Okay, so these are the kind of thoughts to have, as opposed to the kind of thoughts that take us out of this state.
Mm.
Those would be thoughts that would be unwholesome. So when the mind begins to wander away from the here now, and we can catch it, then that's the guard. We can guard the mind. One of the examples that I use, though it's kind of funny one, doesn't seem quite related to the Dhamma, is the bar bouncer. Okay, not the local pub where people come and go, but we're talking about one that's a disco or a big place that's got entertainment, and it's the place to go. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Going to be dressed well enough? Are you drunk already? Do we want you in our club or not? Okay, and so some people are turned away and other people are allowed in. But it's also possible that someone did get past the door, gets inside, and now is causing a ruckus. Perhaps he's been there for a while and now he's gotten drunk and he's making some noise, and it's time for the bouncer to go grab him and throw him out. So we want to have both of these. In fact, what you could say is that the skill of getting into first jhana is the skill of grabbing somebody by the nape of the neck and throwing them out of the bar.
Yeah, so we need to like prune the garden, or like we need to keep weeds from popping up in addition to like getting rid of the ones that are already there, or
Right,
the
get rid of
ones
those that
that
are in
sneak
there
in
and
when we're not
throw them
looking.
out. And
Yeah.
then and once we throw that guy out, now we're going to stand at the door and guard to make sure that whoever comes in is going to be wholesome and part of our establishment.
Yeah.
So these are the wholesome thoughts that we're going to allow in. And the wholesome thoughts are the kind of wholesome thoughts that are keep us in this state of joy, this state of relaxation, this state of happiness.
Mm.
And so this is actually the practice that we need to work on, in the sense of sitting on the floor in meditation. We would be more developing the skill of sustaining. So we get into the state and then we work. Um, um, Perhaps work's not the right word, but we have the enthusiasm and the intention to keep watching what kind of thoughts there are, to make sure that they're wholesome. Because the mind has, Freud talked about it in the sense of free association, that this thought comes up will trigger the next thought,
Mm.
and then the next thought. Well, that next thought, that third thought, may not be wholesome. So what we're doing is we're beginning to track these thoughts that arise naturally and say, wait a minute, that was not wholesome. Out it goes. Let's come back into the world of wholesome. That's possibly the right way to practice on the cushion, to where the right way to practice throughout the day is the bouncer who has to take the thoughts that are already in the mind out. In other words, I'm already sitting here thinking about, I don't want to open that email because that guy's going to yell at me, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, so you're saying on the cushion, trying to work on sustaining like first jhana, but like out of that, we can notice, be like, oh, like notice somebody like sneaked in, or like some bad thought sneaked in, you can toss it out, be more that bouncer, We can just choose to like close our eyes, like look around us, be like, okay, I'm in this room, but okay, now I'm
Right. I can throw that stuff out and I
throw
can
it
come
out.
back to a really nice state.
Yeah.
And we develop that in the sense also of the right attitude of, wow, this stuff is so nice. I'm glad that I'm doing this now.
Okay. Yeah, and so that'd be wholesome. We can like look at our investigation, or like our investigation's going to be wholesome. Um, I guess pleasant sensations in the body, like, oh, this is a nice in breath. That's
Mm.
positive. That's okay to think about. The nice
Yes.
relaxing feeling you get, that's
Hmm.
wholesome. These are all things that we can choose to focus on or like look at when we're doing our meditation that are wholesome, that we don't have to worry about being like unwholesome
Hmm. Yes, exactly.
in the Dhamma, and like things we talked about, or like, oh, this is suffering, I can not be in suffering,
Hmm.
or this is dukkha, but I
Right.
know there's a road out. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as we um, develop the practice, we begin to look at things more and more from the aspect of the Four Noble Truths. In the sense of every thought that comes up, we can have that criteria: is this dukkha or is it not dukkha? If it's not dukkha, it's good. We can have this one. If it's dukkha, out.
Mm.
Okay, so there's your first noble truth. This is dukkha. All right, and we also will begin to understand fairly easily over a practice time of that not only is these kind of thoughts dukkha, but we understand why they're dukkha. In other words, wanting something that we don't have is dukkha. Why is wanting something that we don't have dukkha? And we begin to look at that and recognize, well, the reason why wanting something I don't have is dukkha is because without it, I'm somehow incomplete. I'm not good enough. I'm missing something.
Yeah.
I want it. And I won't be happy until I get it. Until we recognize, wait a minute, that's suffering right there. Getting it is not the end of suffering, but rather, why is there any suffering? The suffering is the wanting. We want something. And so we begin to understand the second noble truth also is not only is these thoughts unwholesome, there's a why, an underlying foundation.
Why aren't they unwholesome?
Why is this suffering? What is the cause of this as it's suffering? And then we can look at it from the perspective of, oh, well, if I throw that out, then I'm free from suffering, and allow ourselves to be. That's something that I find very interesting is that over many, many years and hearing many, many different teachers of Buddhism, only Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talked about the third noble truth. It's almost like that they list it because it's an item on the list, but nobody really ever talks about it.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, in our meditation, it should be possibly the number one item on the list, not for a long term goal, but the immediate goal. The immediate goal is let's get into dukkha nirodha. Let's get into that third noble truth, freedom from suffering. Ah, this is so nice. I'm so glad that I'm out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is something that we want to pay attention to.
Could you repeat that? The third noble truth?
The third noble truth is um, uh, this is freedom from suffering, or this is not suffering. The first noble truth is this is suffering. The second noble truth is this is the cause for suffering. And then the third noble truth is the freedom from suffering. This is not suffering. This is sukha. This is not dukkha.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
and this and we're talking about it in the sense of this present moment, and your experience of this present moment is pleasurable, not painful.
Mm-hmm.
That's the third noble truth.
But everybody stops at two, or they
But
don't
people
ever, they ignore
they
three.
don't give themselves that let's say that investigation.
Mm.
The investigation is, yes, this is in fact freedom from suffering. Don't see it anywhere. It's gone. Ah!
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, I myself get stuck on the like, this is suffering. I don't
Uh-huh.
get stuck on the this isn't. This is great. This
This
isn't
is not
suffering.
suffering. This is
Yeah.
not it. Right. I'm out of it right now.
Always get
Okay.
stuck looking around. It's like, oh, everything's so scary and like spooky in here.
Uh-huh. Well, that's the loser's attitude.
Yeah.
The right attitude is really, this is nice. No suffering here. We won this one.
Dang. Yeah. True. That's funny.
All right. So this is a big part of our practice of bringing in these Four Noble Truths into the sustaining of our practice, because now the kind of thoughts we're going to have are the kind of thoughts about the Four Noble Truths. In the sense is, how is my investigation? How is my attitude? Is this a winner's attitude? Darn right it is. Okay. How's my effort? It's good enough. How's my sati? I remember, I remember, I remember. Okay, so this is the way that we work with the Four Noble Truths as wholesome thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. This isn't like a crime show investigation where you're like, oh my gosh, it's so awful in here.
No,
This
no,
is
no,
a
no, no, no. This
Dhamma
is a
investigation
this
or
is a
something.
Dhamma investigation. Look how nice things are.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the way to practice. Now,
Yeah.
deeper, going deeper into the Four Noble Truths, we can now, or eventually in our conversations, we can go into the aspects, most particularly of the second Noble Truth. That's when things get really complicated, all Buddhis and everything, in the sense of the five aggregates and the 12 steps of Paticca Samuppada. But the 12 steps of Paticca Samuppada is nothing but a, let us say, a detailed investigation of the second noble truth.
Hmm.
You can see it all in there. You know, you have in the second noble truth, you have the cause of suffering is greed, ill will, and ignorance. And guess what? All of that is right there in the teaching of Paticca Samuppada. You start in ignorance, we start building a foundation of ignorance. And so, in the present moment, when we perceive things, we perceive them based upon our old past of likings and not likings and ignorance. And so, what we come up with in this present moment is not often actual reality, it's our made up reality based upon our own past.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so our what that means is that what we make of the world is filled with our own ignorance. The world is or the reality of the senses. The reality is just the reality.
Hmm.
But what we perceive of reality is based upon a bunch of crap that we've had added to it over the years. And we'll talk about this. I'm just giving you just a very short introduction to Paticca Samuppada, so that the feelings that come up will naturally be the kind of feelings of, oh, I like it, I want it. Or if I don't like it, I don't want it. And that's what leads into suffering.
Hmm.
Okay, so you can see, in fact, that the Paticca Samuppada, that huge teaching that's so powerful and profound in Buddhism, is actually nothing but an expose of the second noble truth. And so when we say this is the cause of suffering, we're talking about something that's fairly complicated, but once we understand the mechanism, then we can see it in action.
Yeah.
And we begin to understand how the mind works itself. But again, we're doing it through the perception of the perspective of the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
So,
sense.
right. So the Four Noble Truths is everything of our practice.
Yeah, we can get into as much detail as we want about each of those four, but it's all derivative.
Right. It's all derivative, exactly. And it all has back to do with this basic practice that we're talking about of let's keep the mind wholesome. But eventually we'll begin to look into where did all that unwholesome crap come from? We will look at that, but the real point is that we don't even care where it came from.
Okay.
Out, okay?
Yeah.
In other words, when somebody comes in to our bar and he is loaded down with grease, covered with grease. We don't care what kind of grease it is. We want him out of here.
Hmm.
But there will be a time when we want to actually inspect the various kinds of grease to see um, how we got greasy, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the second noble truth: is where is this? What causes this stuff? How does it come in? But for right now, in the beginning, the important thing is we don't care where it came from. We just want it out of here.
Gotcha. And so, yeah, this week, what I can do, this isn't just on the cushion. This is all the time. It's like if I notice something is snuck in past the bouncer, kick it out. And
Mm-hmm.
my practices on the cushion are going to help me learn to like sustain that feeling of sati.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that whenever I feel like there's a pile of stuff in my head, it's really just one thing. It's always
Sure.
one thing at a time.
One
Sure,
thing at a
maybe it's something different, and maybe it looks to like when I'm not awake, maybe it looks like a pile of things, but it's not.
right. It's not. It's just one thing at a time,
Just one thing at a
and you
time.
can deal, and you can deal with it, and you
Yeah,
can
and I
deal
can
with
deal with it, and I can kick it out. Yeah, that's a lot to do. A lot to
it.
work on. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just talking to you today, I hadn't taken a lot of deep breaths today, but in our conversation, I'm just feeling a lot happier. It was nice to take some deep breaths and talk about the Dhamma. I feel a lot better already.
Excellent. I told you you would.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, the Dhamma does that. When we start thinking about and contemplating the Dhamma and looking at things like that, the hindrances are gone.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is. They
Isn't
are.
that great? Yeah, that's marvelous. And so that's part of the teaching of the Buddha. Let's start thinking about the Dhamma, because when we're thinking about the Dhamma, there's no suffering.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good. We'll finish up now. And
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
yes, Clint, thank you for calling. This has been a good talk. I really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Can I ask you one more question? Like, I guess like I have a hard time finding the definitions of words and stuff that you talk about. I guess like when I go to Wikipedia, it seems like they're always kind of like slightly different. Are there any like glossaries or anything that like you trust the translations on?
Um, Actually, there is one sutta that I have done online with Chen Tan, and also another one that hasn't been published yet. But in there, I point out how to bring up Dhamma Sutta, Dhamma Central suttas with Subato, so that you can do a line by line English and Pali and English and Pali, and then you can roll over or point to with the mouse, and the Pali dictionary will pop up.
Oh, awesome.
Very awesome, exactly. We
Yeah,
didn't have that 30 years ago. We
it's
didn't have
pretty
that, but
fancy.
now we have it. We can actually, and I do that a lot. So for serious students, when they say, "Well, which translation is the best?" I say, "Well, none of the translations are good, but Subato's translations, at least we can go line by line, a line of English, a line of Thai, a line of English, a line of Thai, and that is so helpful, because then we can actually look at the Pali to see what's really going on there.
Yeah,
Uh,
like yeah, I guess I don't think I could really understand well like yeah, I had no like I couldn't just sit down and read a translation. That wouldn't make any sense to me. I'd interpret it wrong and then I'd come back to you with a bunch of garbage. Um, but yeah, I guess just like sometimes there's a lot of words that we say or that you say to me and I'm like, "Ooh, I'm trying to remember these," and I'll like try to go look them up, but then I can't find the right ones. But yeah.
that's that's all right.
Okay. Yes.
Um, Basically, just hearing these words over and over again in context, and they'll seek in. I
Okay,
mean,
awesome. As long as you're fine with it.
look at all of the Pali you already know.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, like
got a
dukkha
couple.
and sukha and piti and a lot of sita, manu, all these kinds of Pali words. They seep in.
Okay, awesome. Well, I guess, yeah, as long as you're fine with the conversation, yeah, just as long as you don't mind correcting me sometimes. Awesome.
The reason that I would say it like that is because often the translations are misleading in many
Yeah,
ways. Um, uh, Possibly the one thing that you could say that is the most interesting is that in the Pali, the language itself and the way that the people used it back in the time of the Buddha is that they used magical language to describe ordinary things. But nowadays, when we hear magical language, the way we look at magical language is that magical language is describing magical things.
yeah. There's like a lot of cultural difference there that like,
Big cultural difference. So things like the word deva would be considered a word of magical, and that would be a deva would be a god or something.
yeah,
But in fact, in the suttas, they'll call a king or an aristocrat a deva, right to his face or in public or
oh
in
wow,
that's just the kind of word that is used. They use magical language to describe ordinary things.
hmm.
And another one is that then the translators will also use magical language to translate things that are actually quite ordinary in their own language. And
Yeah,
I've seen
I can
that
see
in the
that.
sense that it will say this, that, or another, and the other, the way they translate it would be reborn in some clan. But the Pali Dictionary doesn't use reborn in some clan, it uses the word clansman.
Hmm.
And so the rebirth is not in the sutta, that's in the translator. Another place where I've seen would be like the word uh, jiva, which is in the French language. We have Viva la France. Okay, this Viva la or life, and yet that can be translated by modern translators as the word soul, where in fact it's not soul; it's just life.
Okay, yeah, yeah, and like all
Okay.
those little like mistranslations, I'm sure they add up and create a lot of
Oh,
problems
they
for a
add
lot of
up. It
people.
they really, really keep adding up and adding up and adding up. Another one would be using the word samadhi and translating it as absorption. In other words,
Hmm.
they're taking an ordinary word in Pali and putting it into highfalutin English. Okay. Another one would be immersion. Immersion sounds like drowned, like when
Yeah,
somebody's immersed in samadhi, then they're. But you're beginning to understand. Wait a minute, this first jhana that we're talking about is not immersion. It's not going deep. It's waking up. It's going up. It's getting bright,
yeah. Whenever I
becoming
hear
more alive.
purification, or whenever I hear purification, I think in my head like Dante's Inferno, or like
Uh huh.
some hellscape of like the the sin burning away, and
Uh
like I
huh.
don't know what the real translation or like whatever word they were going for, but I don't know. Whenever I hear it, it just like doesn't sit right with me.
Exactly. So you could think of purification as nothing more than just uh, freedom,
Yeah,
or to purify the mind. Sounds highfalutin, but really all we're talking about is let's not have unwholesome thoughts. Let's have wholesome thoughts.
yeah.
That's all it means.
Awesome. Well, okay. I won't sweat the words too much then. I won't try to
Don't
go
worry
like
too much about the
read up.
words, right? You'll
I'll pick them
over
up as we
time
go
that will,
along.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that sounds
You're,
great to me. I feel like I've got a lot to think about, or this week, a lot of
well,
wholesome thoughts,
maybe not so much to think about, and just something intentionally to do.
something to do. Yeah, gotta,
Mm.
yes.
With strong intention, with enthusiasm. I'm not going to let that stuff bother me. Out you go.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you.
See you. Okay, bye
Bye.
bye.